My name is Mariano Avila, and welcome to Indie Less Pop-Up presented by Milwaukee PBS and the John Michael Kohler Arts Center. This year, we're showcasing several powerful films from independent lens, such as Apart, Writing with Fire, and Try Harder. These films by independent filmmakers from across the country address some of the most important issues of our time and provide a richer understanding of society today. We're excited to introduce you to today's film, Missing in Brooks County by Jeff Bemis, Lisa Malamont, and Jacob Bricka. Missing in Brooks County premieres and streams on Independent Lens on PBS Monday, January 31st at 10 p.m. Eastern and 9 Central. I am Mariano Avila. As I said, I'm a producer with Milwaukee PBS, and joining us today are Jacob Bricka, who is an award-winning film editor, producer, director, and scholar. He has edited over a dozen feature documentaries, including the international theatrical hit Lost in La Mancha, the Independent Lens Audience Award winner, Jimmy Scott, If You Only Knew, the 2016 Sundance Special Jury Award winner, The Bad Kids, and the 2021 Critics' Choice Documentary Awards nominee, Missing in Brooks County. His production and directing credits include films screened at the Berlin International Film Festival, DOC New York, and the Hot Springs Documentary Film Festival. He is a member of the prestigious American Cinema Editors, where he is a co-chair and the ACE Education Committee chair. At the University of Arizona, he is the head of the Film and Television Production Division and teaches classes on narrative and documentary film editing, documentary history, and documentary production. Thank you, Jacob, for being with us. John Cezzini is the managing partner at Cezzini Law Group in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. He is not just the managing partner, he's one of the attorneys. Prior to focusing exclusively on immigration law, he practiced criminal law for many years, which his experience makes him uniquely qualified to represent non-citizens with criminal convictions. He works frequently with criminal defense attorneys in criminal cases throughout Wisconsin and has successfully vacated dozens and dozens of criminal convictions for his clients. In 2011, John was selected as a superior lawyer in immigration, a super lawyer, sorry, in immigration. He speaks frequently on immigration issues in the community, and he regularly speaks at immigration-related seminars, including the 2014 American Immigration Lawyers Association annual seminar. He is a member of the American Immigration Lawyers Association, the Wisconsin State Bar, and the 3rd, 6th, and 7th Circuit Court of Appeals, circuits in which he has successfully litigated complex immigration issues. John is a first-generation born U.S. citizen. He received his law degree from IT Chicago, Kent College of Law in 1991. Welcome, John. And also with us is Primitivo Torres Martinez, Deputy Director of Voces de la Frontera. Primitivo was born in Guadalajara, Jalisco, in Mexico on April 1970. He migrated to Milwaukee, Wisconsin in September of '79. He attended Riverside University when the University of Wisconsin when he was majoring in business administration with a minor in psychology. Mr. Torres Martinez has worked for Raíces, Texas, out of San Antonio, as a legal representative, mostly in Karen's Family Detention Center, representing families seeking asylum. So very relevant to our conversation today. His current role is as Deputy Director of Voces de la Frontera right here in Milwaukee. So I want to start us off right in the film, but first I want to thank each of our panelists for joining us. Jacob, to begin with you, thank you for making this film. It's not a light subject. I'm sure it required many, many tough decisions in what you show and what you don't show. And I want to start basically where you did. The opening scene is shocking, it's disturbing, and it's very powerful. That said, it's my opinion that you managed to, as a tough scene with dignity and with respect. So my question is, why did you and your team decide to open with such a shocking scene? included in the beginning as opposed to in another part of the film?
That's a great question, and I was really happy to hear the introductions of Primitivo and John, and to be on this panel with both of you. I'm honored. It's a great question simply because that's one thing that we spent a lot of time thinking about very, very carefully. And we, in fact, avoided putting that scene early in the film for the majority of the time that we were working on our cut, mainly because we were afraid that it would somehow feel exploitative in some way, or overly sensationalistic, by asking people to watch that very quickly. But if we think to how we experienced it, and I'm going to say we as me and the two co-directors, so I edited the film and I'm one of the three producers along with the two co-directors, hearing about that day from Lisa and Jeff, it happened much as you see it. They were driving along with Eddie on a sort of an ordinary day. They were going to do something to retrieve some water, some of his water station, some of that work. And, he heard birds and you saw what happened. So we decided essentially that people needed to know the stakes, and that people that was a way to understand in a visceral way what are the stakes, and what the situation really is there. And it's something that Lisa and Jeff kept on coming back saying, I can't, it feels like another world down there where this kind of death is so frequent and so almost predictable, because of the policy that exists and because of the situation that exists. So that was the reason why we did that. And then to go on after that and to introduce you to a more detailed, fuller look at what that means for two particular families.
To follow up on that, for you personally, when you saw that image, because it sounds like you weren't on that ride, but when you received this image, what were your thoughts? I mean, that's a tough thing to look at.
Unfortunately, in the course of editing this film, I became much more used to looking at images like that. It's sort of and if we look at how a couple of our main people who are in the film who are not the families, Eddie Canales and Dr. Kate Spradley, you can see how they deal with the situation in different ways. Eddie actually has a certain sort of levity and sense of humor he keeps about things. That's how he deals with it, is by putting a certain amount of distance between himself and this in the ways that he can. Kate clearly is very angry, understandably so. That's how Lisa felt coming back from Brooks County. But I think everyone deals with that differently. And I feel like I had a much more, for me, as terrible as it was an image on a screen. I wasn't there for that. And I didn't smell it. I didn't feel it in the same way that they did. So, our intention was to, in general with the film, try to treat this as a humanitarian issue, essentially, and that this is a genuine humanitarian crisis that ought to be treated as such, and in many ways is not being treated as such. So it was very difficult to watch.
Yeah, I'm sure. I want to ask Primitivo, so you've spent 3 years working on the border, so you've also had this experience of seeing some of these situations or talking to families who are experiencing it. Can you tell me a little bit about what you see when you watch this film that perhaps we here in Milwaukee wouldn't notice or know, but should know?
This kind of films we need more of. A lot of times we live in a society that we try to live blindfolded, right? We want to live a good life. Those images right there don't belong to us and my family, but it really does. When it really affects all of us. This really brought me back. What we did at Raiz is we will represent between 40 to 50, 60 families a day. We worked inside the detention centers where they kept all the kids, all the families. One in particular is called Carnes Family Detention Center. That's where I spent most of my time. Now, in these times, we would help these families what is called a credible fear interview. Before they see an asylum officer, they ask them what are they afraid of, right? What is happening back home? So we try to get to the bottom of that. And it was within these times that we were prepping the families for their interviews, whether in front of an asylum officer or in front of an immigration judge. So we got to hear a lot of these stories. So this film took me back. My brother is missing. We can't find my father. We can't find my cousin. A friend of mine was missing. And what we see is we find later on that they have died, either of dehydration or they're victims to the cartels, right? Where they use them as what is called as mulas to cross the border and really pass their legal substance. But these families are seeking refuge, right? But they're being taken advantage of at the border. It's a whole different world, but we see it as, it's the border. It really doesn't affect us, but it really does. This is a humanitarian issue that's going on at the border. And unfortunately, we don't see enough of this film. So I thank Jacob and the rest of the producers to really put this out to shed some light, something that happens every single day. When we were down there, the last year was 2019. We were averaging one death per day. I mean, it is inconceivable, and at the same time, it's very tragic.
And just to follow up a little bit on that particular point, one of the arguments you hear a lot for asylum seekers, weirdly, is why don't they just come in the right way, right? And I know that this is generally for undocumented folks, but specifically, it surprised me when I've talked to folks that it's the same argument used for asylum seekers. Can you shed some light on what asylum seekers are going through? And I know that John is going to give us a very specific perspective as an attorney, but for someone who works on kind of the humanitarian side of this, what are they going through when they're trying to seek asylum at the border?
Well, first, I'm very happy to have John on this panel as well. He's very well respected in our community, and he's just a tremendous lawyer. He's done some good cases for us as well, for our community. So I worked with John for many years. But the humanitarian side for us is we get to listen to these families, right? Why they're coming and the reason behind that. And I think we have to get to the bottom of it and really see what's causing these migrations. That's the number one key to really stop this migration, is really go see exactly what's going on in this country. Unfortunately, the U.S. caused a lot of this migration. We can get into that. That's a whole subject in itself. But a lot of these families, what they are fearing, what they're fleeing is death. We were dealing between 40, 50, 60 families a day. And it was the same story, right? A lot of it was economic impoverished. Of course, there's a lot of things happening with economies and this collapse of the Central American countries. But these people are coming from all over the world, and not just El Salvador, Honduras, or Guatemala, or Mexico. You'll be very surprised. Very few Mexicans are coming across compared to these other people. You have people from the Middle East, Africa. And to hear the stories is very similar. A lot of it is it's exploitation. A lot of it is they just cannot survive in their country, whether it's economic or it's social or it's politics as well. A lot of politics gets in the way of doing the right thing in this country, and people are the victims at the very end. People are the victims of this violence. And especially in the Central America, what we see is they're fleeing violence. They're fleeing extortion. You have a lot of business owners who are trying to survive and trying to really make ends meet for their families, and they get hit up every single week for extortion. So there's many different reasons why they're coming. And I think that's where it starts, right? We should look at the reason they're migrating in the first place.
Yeah, I think it was Pope Francis who said we shouldn't be looking at immigration, but at emigration and the causes behind it. John, I'd like to ask you, one of the things that struck me most was the sense of powerlessness that families felt at pretty much every step of this process. And given how dangerous this journey is for folks who are either thinking of coming into the country or have departed already, what would you say to families whose loved ones are in this situation, but the families are here in Milwaukee or in the Midwest, far away from the border where they can directly intervene?
What would I say to them? Well, being in Milwaukee, obviously we don't know exactly what's going on at the border. We don't have that experience. And I do get many clients who have come from the border, but that's after they've been released, right? They're able to come up. I mean, finding loved ones are one of the hardest things to do. Generally, if I have someone who comes into my office and says, I can't find this person, I'll help them. There's a website online called locator.ice.gov, where if you have either an A number or their name, date of birth, and country of origin, you can try to find them. Now, it doesn't always work. Sometimes that's updated immediately. Sometimes it takes days to get updated. So it's really difficult. I mean, it's families, they go through a lot when they can't find a loved one, just as Primitivo was talking about. It's a humanitarian crisis at that border. There's no question about that.
And I guess when folks are here and they're looking for families and they're talking to their family members, what are some of the options for people who are maybe waiting at the border and are tired that do not involve crossing through Berks County or places like that are that dangerous? Are there other options for asylum seekers who are at the border?
Probably 99.9%, probably not. If some families are lucky enough to have, U.S. citizens or permanent residents, they may be able to process applications through a family type petition. But other than that, which for Mexicans and will take years and years. I mean, scores, 20 years sometimes, 30 years to actually process it. So, the asylum laws are antiquated. I don't think they've been changed for about 40 or 50 years. A quick example, until recently, domestic violence, was not a way where you could apply for asylum. So if a woman came and made and could show that she was assaulted by her husband, until about 6, 7, 8 years ago, the asylum application would be denied because they would equate that as, well, that's a crime. That's not a basis for asylum. Until the courts were able to change some of that law and now make that, and now have a law that says, if you are a victim of domestic violence, there is a basis that you can apply for asylum now. So gangs, when you, as Primitivo was talking about, when you're a victim of some of these gangs, which are infiltrated throughout the southern border, in many instances, that's not a basis for asylum pursuant to the current case law. You have to become imaginative, and quite frankly, you have to have some sensitive judges, immigration judges, right, who will listen to your story, will listen to your argument, and perhaps, think outside of the box and grant an asylum case. The asylum laws have to be changed. They're too antiquated, and I know at the border too, there's not enough representation for individuals. I think I was looking at it at the border, about 7% of all people have a lawyer in asylum proceedings. So
So not much on the legal avenue
Right.
that's available for folks, especially if they're coming destitute. And
right. And one more thing, when you're talking about come in the right way, well, asylum is the right way, right? You come to the border, you request asylum. That's our law. That's been our law forever. That's the way you're supposed to do it. Right? So that is the right way. And then you go through the process of the asylum law. So that argument, should not even be discussed with asylees.
No, that makes a lot of sense. And actually, it leads perfectly into a question I'd like to ask each of you. You have very different perspectives, as a filmmaker, as an attorney, as an activist. There's things that can be done to either prevent or mitigate the situation. And I think sometimes those of us who are not directly working in these settings or on these issues feel kind of powerless. Especially when you've got numbers like these, where if I saw everything correctly, you've got the equivalent of 9/11 happening in Brooks County alone, as far as death numbers go, which is, I think, roughly 2,000, and 20 times that throughout the country starting in 1994. These are staggering numbers. So I want to take a moment to ask each of you to maybe tell us what you think could be done, can be done, what we can do. And also, while each of you answers, for folks watching, think of your own questions, send them to us either in the chat or in any other way. And we'll be taking questions from the audience as soon as our panelists answer this particular question. So let me start with Jacob. If you could tell us, what do you think can or should be done about this issue?
Well, on the biggest level, somehow we need to start thinking differently about what the border is and how we treat it. It has become the border was not always thought of as a police and military issue, but this started a few decades ago and has only increased. So on the biggest level, we need to do that because it leads to situations like, Theo was talking about, extortion. That happens on this side of the border too, because of the incentives that are created. So in general, families are fearful of reporting crimes because they themselves may be undocumented, or the person that the crime is happening to is undocumented. And therefore you have, what you see happen in the film is that this family gets a call from someone who claims to have Homero, and they just want some money, and then they'll release him. In all likelihood, what they did is they saw the wanted poster and they concocted a story, and they called them up and they got $1,000 out of them, and that happens all the time. We have something we weren't able to put in the film, but that is one of the local deputies, sheriff deputies, talking about how, there's like all day long, there's people just driving up and down these roads. And what they are is they're opportunists who are looking for lost people so that they can pick them up and they can seem to offer them help. But in fact, what they're doing is they're starting an extortion attempt. And they're like, give us the name of your family, we can help you. And then the family gets a call and they actually do have that person with them. And they, and they will find a way to get some, it's just the lawlessness because of how the policy works, just everything is sort of seated in the wrong direction. But to point towards something a little more hopeful, and less big, one thing that is just needed is just more funding for recovery efforts and for the work that has to get done, just because there are people missing and because there are recovery needs and people trying to make matches and find people who are missing. And ironically, because Brooks County is not on the border until very, very recently, it's never been eligible for any funding. So they have all of the problems of the border, but they're too far away from the border to get any money, federal money, to help the problem. That has changed a little bit in one of the last acts in Donald Trump's administration. There was a bipartisan bill, I'm forgetting the name of it, but on December 31st, 2020, if I'm not mistaken, it was signed into law by Donald Trump. It passed by unanimous consent in the Senate. It was authored by The two main authors were Kamala Harris and John Cornyn, a Republican and Democrat, and it provided funding for these kinds of efforts. And it hasn't yet been, the money hasn't been allocated, but the bill was passed. So that money needs to be allocated by Congress, and that needs to be followed through on. So that's one very concrete thing.
Wow. Thank you. That is, like you said, that is hopeful. There's not much to.
It is hopeful. Yes. There's a little bit of work that doesn't get a lot of press, but there are little ways where this can some aspects of this can still be seen in a bipartisan way.
Thank you, Jacob. Primitivo, from your perspective, what can folks do? What needs to happen?
That's a very broad question. I think on the federal end here, we need common sense legislation when it comes to immigration reform. We need that. We need our legislators, our representatives to really have the courage not to kick this down the road as they always have. They keep kicking it down the road. Same thing with asylum law. It is so antiquated. John was just speaking to that about that. You have to change that ruling. Asylum law is so antiquated that people do not qualify. When I was at the border, it depended who was in front of me as a judge. We had great cases. We had rape cases. We had really concrete cases. It all depended on who was listening to us. Was it a liberal judge? Was it a conservative judge? We already knew going forward what the judge was, what the outcome was going to be. That is super sad. That's not the way it should be. Now, these families, when they look for help, there's not a lot of places at the border that can really help them. You have like this movie, you have like South Texas Human Rights Center with Eduardo Canales, which I spoke to a few times. Fantastic guy. He can only do what he can. Very short-handed. He has maybe 175 these water stations across. If you go to California, you have Las Águilas del Desierto, which is the eagles of the desert, right? In Arizona, you have no más muertes, no more deaths. But you have very limited people who help. You have like the Border Angels, and you have this place called Water Station Inc., who puts water stations out there. But there is no help for these people. What we have to find out is the foundation. What is the issues? Why are they migrating here? And right now, what we can do for this help for these people is that common sense legislation. I think it goes back to our legislators, right? And really digging down, what is the root cause of the problem causing migration? But these families are in need now. This border has made it very political the last few years, even when Clinton, Obama, now with Trump as well, to build this wall, right? You built this crisis at the border, which never existed, just created it. So they're using it as a political pawn for their own self-interest. We have to stop that because we're dealing with human life that we're losing on a daily basis.
Thank you, Primitivo. You specifically said that there is common sense legislation that is needed. Is there anything like that currently kind of making the rounds?
We have we had under the Build Back Better, we had a bill in there for immigration reform, right? It started out as citizenship for 11 million people, and they watered it down to include only work permits and to have a valid social security number for 5-year work permits. You can renew it one time, which is a 10-year. So all the immigration advocates fought for this bill, and it was only going to include 7 to 8 million people. Unfortunately, that was taken out. The parliamentarians, Senate parliamentarians, decided to take that portion out of the Build Back Better, and then later on, the bill just kind of died. It's still there. So we do have a legislation now that we can pass that will ease the families that we have here and also will help the families that are coming in. So we do have it right now in Congress, but do they have the courage to really go with it? That's the key question, and I doubt it if they have the courage. They just keep kicking the can down the road.
Thank you, Primitivo. John Cecchini, what do you think needs to happen? What can happen? What do you see is happening?
Yeah, I think I agree with both Jacob and Primitivo. I'm becoming a cynic as far as having immigration reform. I used to be really, they have to do it. They have to do it like with DACA kids. That's, for me, that's a no-brainer. Just give them their residency. And I can't believe that our the senators or congressmen don't have the wherewithal or the political guts really to pass something. But what I would say as well is do what Jacob is doing. We have to educate. We really have to educate the public as to what's going on at the border, what's going on in immigration courts, what's going on with our whole immigration system and how antiquated it is. I think I'm hopeful that once you educate the people, that will translate into more, humanitarian thoughts, political power. Start voting people in who maybe have, the political guts, the political fortitude to pass some of these laws. But I think education is huge. We need more of these, Jacob's documentary, awesome. We need more of those because quite frankly, I don't think people really care too much what's happening at the border, in general. Especially in the northern states, we're so far away from it, it doesn't affect daily lives. But I think once you see the inhumanity at the border, I think that I am hopeful that it would change people's minds from all different parts of the political spectrum.
We can only hope.
I hope, yeah.
So, I mean, to bring it back to Jacob, we do have an audience question here that says, was there something you learned, was there something that you learned during the production of this film that you wish you had included? So whether it's a scene or a topic or something, and that had to hit the floor at some point, just due to timing or pacing or whatever.
There's one scene that we were sure for most of the production that was going to be a major, it was going to be in the film, that didn't make it in. And it's a scene at the local 911 call center. And we spent a little bit of time there on some evenings, just spending an average evening at the 911 center. And it is routine that they get distress calls from people who have gotten lost out there. And another thing that goes along with that we didn't get to put in were these so-called bailouts, because what happens when the local authorities find a vehicle that they think has undocumented people in it, is a chase ensues, a high-speed chase. And then what often happens is that the driver bails out and they basically go off the road, and everybody who's in the back of the vehicle just scatters. They just scatter into the brush, which is an absolute recipe for death because they are going in a place that has, as soon as you get away from that road, you cannot tell where you are. Everything looks the same as everything else. People think that they're okay, I'll just travel in a straight line, eventually I'll find a road. Unfortunately, most people's sense of direction isn't that good, and people end up veering one way or the other and actually going in sort of a semicircle as opposed to actually going straight. So anyways, those were scenes, and there's one in particular at the 911 center of someone who, he says, yeah, I'm up in a tree. I had some dogs, dogs that chased me up this tree, and I need to, I'm out of water. And then the line goes dead. And they had not yet done the tracking to figure out where the coordinates of that point was. And it was just that was almost more horrifying than seeing the dead body, just because of imagining that person in that situation. But that happens.
There was that rancher that actually was bragging about doing that with his dogs, wasn't he?
Yeah. And so there are, when we tried to show just by how you see that even the authorities who have all of these, they've got satellite GPS and everything, in order to find a place where they're going, they've got to use that. They're using these long, longitude, latitude numbers. It is really, it's a large, these ranches are tens of thousands of acres apiece. There's the whole issue of they're all private. So, we don't get into this issue, but a lot of time, they have to get permission from law enforcement to go on those ranches, and they usually do, but that's yet another thing that stops this from being, that makes it a dangerous place where it's hard to search for people, et cetera. But those are a couple of things that happened that very easily could have been in the movie. And in order to make a coherent, tight movie, things things get left on the cutting room floor.
That last point that you mentioned actually leads us to another audience question, which is how does this affect local communities? And I guess, Primitivo, you could probably also answer that one, but just holding on to you, Jacob, for a second. Is there an impact in the local community beyond just the ranchers whose properties they're on, you know?
I mean, I think we try to show, like, Primitivo, do you want to jump in?
Go ahead, Jake.
It affects those, you know, we try to show in subtle ways the effect it has on the Border Patrol officers. I think you can see it in the body language and the face of the agent who talks about how they don't call them people anymore, they call them bodies, because that is a coping mechanism that has to be used, you know, and he, you know, told us off camera, he said, I don't put this on camera because I don't want to lose my job, but I see ghosts. And I mean, he basically was telling us about his own PTSD, which is really common out there, but it's not really acknowledged as an occupational hazard, and therefore it's not really looked at all that seriously or treated. And, you know, so those are more people, like the ripples of this go out in every direction. And that is, you know, that's one of the only decent jobs out there. It's a pretty poor area. And so those jobs are sought after because they're federal jobs. They pay pretty well. They have benefits. Not so much that like the local sheriff's deputies, their pay is shockingly low. But anyways, you have this human impact from everyone who deals with this, including the people who are enforcing it, you know?
If I can echo that, then just kind of answer that as well. It definitely has an effect on the communities, but they get, after a while, they just become immune. It just happens so often. And I think that's one of the questions that you said is, where can we do? Where can it start? And it starts right here, right there and then, with the way we identify them, right? We try to dehumanize them and say, it's just the body, right? And I've heard that so many times at the border. It's just an illegal, right? It's not a human person. I think it starts with us to not use that rhetoric. Stop using illegal alien, right? These are people who are out of status, who are undocumented. So it starts right there. The way you define these people. When I work, it's nuestra gente. Like I always say, it's our people. Because they will say these people. When I was working at the border, that's the way they were mentioned. Aquellos is them, is the illegals, right? It's like they're less than human. So it's okay if I find a body every day, we already dehumanize them. So we need to be sensitized when it comes to that. And for us to use those terms, I think it starts with us. You stop using all those terms and put a human face, like this documentary that Jacob did. I totally agree with John Cecchini. We need more of this. We need to put a human side of it, because it's just illegals. No, these are human beings who are losing their life on a daily basis.
John, I don't want to leave you out of this. Is there anything that you would like to add to this?
No, they're very eloquent, and I would agree with everything they said. Absolutely.
Yeah, I think, you know, unfortunately, most people, whether they live, even people in Texas or in a border state, you know, less so, but most people's conception of what happens at the border is pretty superficial, and it is informed, you know, to some degree by fear, and that fear is kind of relentlessly exploited politically. That is what I think, that, you know, that when it comes down to it is just a huge part of it. And what we tried to show was, you know, there's a scene that we were kind of trying to make this point where you have these vigilantes out there who really do believe, some of them, that there are, you know, conspiracies afoot to assemble enough folks on our side of the border and then have an internal uprising or something like that. And that's what they see when they, you know, they very well could be going on. You know, it's like, so the fear factor is tremendous, right? And then, you know, and then we cut to someone being picked up along the road, exactly the kind of thing that they're worried about. And, you know, our experience from being there all of the time that we were there was that what you find tends to be a young man like that who because certain local mafia took over his business, and then he tried to find other ways to find work, but in fact he was shut out. A year went by. He was like, I've got to provide for my family somehow. Maybe I'll try this. And even when you pick him up, like the first thing he wants to do is go back home, and he's upset when they tell him it's going to be 3 weeks until all the processing is done. And you find someone who clearly has just a big heart and is doing pretty much what you and I would do if we were in that situation. So and that is, I think, if hopefully if you can get through to and you put faces like this and faces like the families who are trying to figure out what to do about their loved ones, and the happy birthday video, and these are people who live right around you. These are people who are all around you, who have situations like this, and they are not by and large, they are not scary people who are up to no good.
And Jacob, I think that's the power of your. Oh, go ahead.
I'm sorry. You could look at the statistics about, they say that undocumented immigrants, they commit more crimes and all this nonsense. And if you look at the statistics, it's just completely false. So that's why you got to educate people. I think that's a huge thing. And Jacob, you got to keep doing this kind of stuff.
Yeah, and I think there's education of numbers and figures and the latest news, and I think there's education of the heart that we don't really talk about, which is what personal, intimate stories like the ones you guys told, Jacob, are really a different type of storytelling that is lacking in the daily news cycle, and really valuable when someone takes the time to make it. And so I personally would like to thank you for making the film, for spending the time to make it as excellent as you guys made it. It's as someone who has done documentary work, I can see the care and work that it took to make the film that you made. It really is powerful, but it's also in its own haunting way beautiful. And I want to thank you for making it. I want to thank all of our panelists for joining us. Primitivo, thank you very much for the work that you do along the border. Thank you for the work that you do now here in Wisconsin. John Cicini, same to you. Thank you for defending families. Thank you for upholding our legal system and trying to make it work for those who need it to work for them as well. And for those who are still with us, for those who joined us, thank you very much for your time, for your attention, for joining us at PBS. We hope that this screening provided a starting point for you to have conversations about this very true and deep human crisis at the border that every citizen of the United States has a share of responsibility in. This film premieres and streams on Independent Lens on PBS Monday, January 31st at 10 p.m. Eastern, 9 p.m. Central. Mountain Time would be 8, and Pacific Time would be 7. Please take a few minutes to fill out the survey. Your feedback is invaluable in helping us understand how we can improve Indie Lens pop-up events. Visit milwaukeepbs.org/events for updates on local events coming this season. And a special thank you to our national partners, Independent Lens, ITVS, PBS, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, and the John Michael Kohler Arts Center. Thank you to all of you again, and have a good night. My name is Mariano Avila, and I was very honored to be here with you. I hope you take this and think about it, and I hope that more films like this can be part of our lineup in the future.